Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com, and I'm here on behalf of Produce Like a Pro. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Liquidsonics Reverb. At this point, you are probably familiar with Liquidsonics. They have made a name for themselves as being one of the best reverb plugin manufacturers in the business. I'm very familiar with Seventh Heaven. You can actually jump over to Weiss Advice, my YouTube channel, and hear a direct comparison between Seventh Heaven and my hardware Bricasti M7, and they are basically interchangeable. They did an incredible job. They just came out with Cinematic Rooms, so I'm going to be experimenting with that a little bit here on a record that Eric and Warren have queued up for me. It's a really cool record. We're going to be tying in the reverb choices and talking about it more on an emotional level rather than a spatial level, and that'll make sense in a moment. But let's check this out. So it's a really cool record here. We've got a very impassioned, dramatic vocal performance, very emotive, and how that interacts with the reverb is going to be really important. We also have a really cool sounding, very old school kind of sounding drum recording that is going to want to be colored up a little bit to match with those strings, and also some really, really nice 12-string guitars that come in a little bit later that I want to play with as well. So let's start with just some basic ideas here about choosing reverbs and what we're looking for in a reverb. There's kind of two thoughts in my mind. There's the one that we always think of, which is the front to back imaging, how far something is, how close something is, and what reverbs we pick are going to have a lot to do with that. If we're talking about halls, we can usually get more distance from our halls. If we're talking about plates, things tend to sound a little bit closer, but there's another level to it as well, which is kind of the creative emotional side. And while there isn't an exact way to boil this down, I would say that when we're picking our reverb, we can kind of keep in mind that there's this sort of transitive property of reverb, where whatever the reverb sounds like, that is going to affect our perception of the sound that the reverb is coming from. So in a very simplistic example for a case, if we have a dark vocal or a dark source of any sort and we use a bright reverb, the bright reverb will actually create a sense of brightening the source, not just the reverb. So because of that, if there are qualities and emotional qualities of a reverb, those kind of psychoacoustically get prescribed onto the source as well. So I kind of want to start with the vocal here, actually. I want that drama in a reverb. I want something that's going to sound impassioned the same way our lead vocalist is. So let's solo her up here real quick.
Oh, you turn your back on loving now, tearing up my heart into pieces, and to the ground you let them fall.
Right, so a lot of compression on this vocal. There's a lot of very distinct breaths. Breaths are really, really important in a sound. The breathing actually is one of the main emotional cues that we latch on to. So a lot of the times we're trying to tuck breaths, but in this example, I like the bit of over-breathing in her voice, and I like those bursts of breath. To me, it almost sounds like she's exhausted by something. She's tired of something, or there's something putting tension in her world. So with that in mind, I'm going to pop on over here to Liquidsonics, and I'm going to grab Cinematic Room. We're in stereo, so let's do that. And I'm going to try and find something that's going to complement her sound, her vibe, and mostly really listen to how the reverb interacts with the breath. So what I want to do here is jump into pre-fader mode, and I'm going to monitor just our reverb returns, which is a little different. I know it's a little weird. It's like the soloiest of soloing, which we're not supposed to do. It's a no-no. But we're going to do it anyway here. So let's just hear what the default does. I've never heard Cinematic Rooms before, but I'm very excited because I've heard Seventh Heaven. That is incredibly realistic. That is crazy realistic sounding. Wow. Okay. So I think for this vocal, I don't necessarily want something realistic. I want something that's going to have a little bit of extra color to it, some kind of chorusing or modulation to make it feel a little bit surreal. Not too surreal, but just a little bit. I'm also thinking because of the drama, the way she's leaning into her voice and really pushing on those upper notes, something that creates a big sense of like a grand space might be good as well. So let's go to our halls or spaces. Not sure. I'm kind of guessing Helios Space. That's an interesting name. Ancient Duomo. Let's try this Helios Space. Let's see what this feels like. That top end texture that we're hearing, that's a very high diffusion reverb. So I kind of like that because it sounds a little bit, high diffusion kind of makes things sound like they're boundless in a way. Let's do a larger room. So this is going to lengthen the attack window. This is going to cause a slower buildup. Let's use a slightly shorter time so it doesn't get washy. Let's pull a little bit of the highs out, damp those highs a little bit more, and also pull a little bit of highs from the early, well, that's the reverberation, my bad. Let's pull a little bit out of the early reflections. So let's filter from down here. Yeah, that's a little bit better. I might even damp the top a little bit more, actually. Let's go a little bit longer on the bass, a little bit shorter on the treble. Reflectivity, let's take that down a little bit too. I'm going to assume that's another damping control. Size I like. Proximity I like because that far proximity is going to make it feel like she's in this very big space. And let's hear what that sounds like now with the vocal paired in.
Oh, you turn your back on loving now, tearing up my heart into pieces and to the ground you let them fall. It's the darkness that hurts.
Okay, we're getting to where I'm liking it. I think a shorter pre-delay, which is going to connect the reverb with the vocal a little bit more, make her feel like she's slightly further back and in that bigger space. And I'm curious what this bloom does. I've never seen a control like that.
Oh, you turn your back on loving now, tearing up my heart into pieces and to the ground you let them fall.
So that's very interesting. The bloom is giving this kind of arc to the way the echoes are building up. It's almost like a compressor on the front of the reverb, which I think is kind of cool. I don't want that much of it, but I think a little bit of it is going to put a little bit more swing and pocket into her voice, which is going to affect the rhythm. Let's hear what this sounds like all together.
It's on your back on loving now, tearing up my heart into pieces to the ground you let them fall. It's the darkness that hurts the most, and it's the lonely that shields my...
I think that's beautiful. I'm really happy with that. I think a little bit more darkness in the tail because she has a natural brightness to her voice. So like I said, if it's too bright in the reverb, it's going to take this bright vocal and make it seem even more bright. I kind of want to go the opposite direction. I want to get into the darker feel. There's a very minor structuring that's underneath of this. Even though there's a lot of major chords, it still feels like it's in a minor key, darker tones. I kind of want to stay in that vibe.
It's on your back.
That sounds really good. That sounds really dope. Very cinematic, which is probably not a coincidence. So we're going to keep that. We're going to roll with that. Let's jump on over to the drums here. Do we want a complementing space? Do we want a contrasting space? I feel like there's a lot of contrasting spaces because there's some VST layers that have some reverbs baked in. So I think I'm going to want a space that's going to get along with the vocal. Also, I'm curious as to what level. The level felt really good to me, but I'm curious as to what level was already there. So there's a little down. Okay, let's take it out of pre-fader mode for the vocal too. Cool, let's solo up our drums here. Actually, let's go back into pre-fader mode on our vocal reverb. I want to bring in the vocal reverb with the drums. This is a trick of mine where if you really want to get reverbs that blend together really nicely, make a very cohesive sounding record, one of those things that makes it sound like a record, so to speak, having all the reverbs in agreement with each other goes a very long way in that regard. So if I have the reverb playing while I'm kind of figuring out what I want my drum reverb to sound like, vocal reverb playing while I'm figuring out my drum reverb, it's going to allow me to pick something that's going to get along right off the bat, which will make the mix kind of just fall together. The kick has a lot of room in it. I think if I was to get really meticulous, I would probably try and gate the kick a little bit and build in a little bit of a reverb that got along better with the vocal reverb we had picked. That might be getting too into the weeds, though. Let's work on the snare first. I think that's going to be a good place to start. So cinematic rooms, let's pull it up. Okay, so I want a tighter space. I don't want something that's so grandiose feeling. I want something that's a little bit tighter. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, didn't you just say that you wanted something that's going to get along with the other reverb? Why are you going for something that's contrasting right away? Here's the thing about picking reverbs. There's more similarity in picking the same algorithm, no matter how you set it, than picking two different algorithms or two different types of, two different units of reverb. Put another way, if you have something like cinematic rooms up, that's the same algorithm. Any version of cinematic rooms, whether it's a plate or a hall or a room, is going to sound more like it's the same reverb than if you pick the same type of reverb, but from like a lexicon. So the cinematic room plate is going to sound more like the cinematic room hall than it's going to sound like a lexicon plate, if that makes sense. So just by the nature of it being the same algorithm, these are going to gel pretty easily. So, okay. Right? That's our rhythm. So something basement-y kind of feels right. Something dark cellar-y kind of feels right. We're looking for something that is going to have a heaviness to it, is going to invoke some of those more dramatic emotions. So I'm thinking dark cellar might be something to, I'm just guessing again. I've never used this plugin before, but let's see how this feels. Maybe a little too tight, but also let's push this reverb up a lot. Let's see what happens if we really just crank into it here. I like that. I think I want to send some from the overheads as well. I think I want to go full on with this. Let's send the tambourine there too. Let's get the whole thing going. Where's our tam track? We've got a shaker, we've got tambourine, we've got tambourines. We've got so many tambourines. Those are called the hit makers. Anytime your record's not a hit, throw in a tambourine. You have a hit record. And it's the lonely that she So I want there to be a little bit more impact. I love the color of the reverb. I think it sounds amazing. It's got a great sense of depth. It's got that sense of darkness that we're looking for. But I think a little bit of compression on the reverb is also going to go a far way. It's going to create just a little bit more boominess to it, which I think it needs just a little bit to lock it in place. Let's just use, good old basic, the good old basic. So soft knee, short attack, light ratio. 80 milliseconds probably pretty close, but I'm going to start a little shorter. Let's go.
That hurts the most, and it's the lonely that chills my bones. It's the scars that hide the truth, but it's my heart that makes me run. It's that hurts the most, and it's the lonely that chills my bones. It's the scars that hide.
I think I want a little bit more bass in the snare, actually. I'm going to mess with this mix a little bit. We're going to push a little bit more low end into the snare, too.
It's that hurts the most, and it's the lonely that chills my bones. It's the scars that hide the truth, but it's my heart that makes me hurts the most, and it's the lonely that chills my bones. It's the scars that hide.
Nice. Okay, let's get these 12 strings here. So this is a really cool sound. Warren knows what he's doing. That was a fantastic sound. That's so cool sounding. All right, so same idea. I feel like I want this all to glue together. Let's pull out Cinematic Rooms, and I'm going to try and find something weird. I want to find something, because there's already this sense of like room and depth. So what I want to send in here is a bit of character, something that's a little bit unpredictable or weird. I don't know what Ancient Duomo is, but I'm going to guess that that's going to do exactly that. That's so cool. That's such a cool, weird sound. I love cool, weird sounds. Okay. This reminds me like the Phantom of the Opera. It's completely irrational that I feel that way, but it does. Yeah, I'm just shortening it a little bit in terms of its duration, but I think that's going to sound really good. That sounds amazing. It's too much. It's too much reverb for sure, but that sounds so cool. Okay, I'm really happy about that. Oh, and it just worked immediately. So this makes me look like a genius and I don't even have to work for it. Perfect. It's not so far off from the reverb that's on the strings that those feel like they're not blending either. The reverb on the string definitely has a little bit more texture in the top end. It's like a very high diffusion kind of and like granulated sounding type of algorithm that's on the VST strings, but it's not so far off where like you're like, oh, those sound like they're in two different universes. So I'm happy with that. I'm gonna play this back end of the chorus one more time, and I think that we're good. That sounds like $1 million. It's given like modern, but with a slight touch of that kind of like evanescence space thing happening. Yeah, I'm really happy with that. Cool. So the other thing I got to say is I need to hit up these people directly because they have 714 and I've been doing Atmos mixes lately, and this is going to sound crazy in surround and Atmos, so I got to get my hands on this reverb for sure. If you dig this video, hit that like button. If you're not already subscribed to Produce Like a Pro, hit that subscribe button as well. And I have a saying on my channel over at Weiss Advice. It goes like this: we are musicians, sound is our instrument. And of course, I'll catch you next time.